The morning sun spilled softly over Napa Valley like warm honey, coating the rolling vineyards in golden light. The rows of vines stretched endlessly in both directions, grapes fat with the promise of harvest. It was quiet except for the hum of insects and the occasional rustle of a rabbit darting through the brush. There was something sacred about that hour. It's untouched by noise or time. Alina Marlowe stepped out from her rental cottage wearing a light jacket, journal tucked under her arm. She closed the door without locking it. She never locked it here. Place felt too gentle, too suspended from the chaos of cities and deadlines. She walked slowly, her boots brushing gravel, the wind stirring wisps of her chestnut hair. She didn't carry her phone. That morning, she had written in her journal, 1 hour of silence. No screens, just the vines, the earth, and my breath. She passed the edge of the property line through a small wooden gate that led into the vineyard. It was private land, but the elderly couple who managed it never minded the occasional morning walker. Alina had met them once, quiet folks, kind eyes, lived up the road. She waved to their empty porch as she passed, though she knew they wouldn't see her. She walked deeper, her figure slipping between the tall rows of vines. Birds took flight as she passed. Sun climbed higher, and then Alina Marlowe vanished. No scream, no sounds of struggle, just ... silence. The wind shifted slightly. Somewhere, a raven landed on a wire and cocked its head. By noon, the old couple noticed her cottage door still ajar. It wasn't like her. They knocked once, twice, then called the sheriff. A quiet search began. Sheriff Donnelly used to drunk. Vineyard workers and the occasional lost hiker wasn't prepared for what he didn't find. No signs of foul play, no signs of a break-in. Just her journal left carefully beneath a grape, trellis closed. Pages still warm from the morning sun. It was the only clue. Inside the journal, Lena had scribbled pages of observation, reflections, tasting notes from the previous night's wine sampling. On the final page, there's something about this place, this stillness. Like the land remembers things it shouldn't, then silence. The case barely made local news. Another woman gone. Another mysterious hiker story lost in the shuffle of more urgent headlines. The media gave her 3 days. Her photo circulated briefly, dark, intelligent eyes, warm but cautious smile. She was 33, no criminal record, no mental health history. A rising name in travel blogs, known for immersive slow travel essays. She had no spouse, no children. Closest living relative, a younger sister named Rachel, flew in from Portland. Eyes swollen, voice shaking. She helped pack up the cottage. Took the journal, cried once briefly, in the kitchen where Alina had made tea the night before. I don't believe she ran, Rachel told the sheriff. That's not Alina. She was ... steady. The kind who remembers birthdays. The kind who checks in. But what could the sheriff do with no blood, no footprints, no DNA? Time passed. The vineyards moved on. Locals began calling her the woman who dissolved into the fog. At wine tastings, tourists whispered that her spirit walked the vines. The story turned ghostly in the way only small towns can twist grief into folklore. Some believed she fell into a ravine. Others thought she left on purpose, staged her disappearance like a poetic vanishing act. But there was one thing they all agreed on. The vineyard felt different after Alina disappeared. One worker quit without notice. Another refused to harvest. The northern rose, claiming the vines there grew too fast and that the soil had gone sour. No one officially reported anything unusual. But that season, Vivian DeClaire, the vineyard's enigmatic owner, quietly canceled her annual tour of the northern slope. No reason given. 2 years passed. The vines bloomed, ripened, and were harvested again. A new batch of tourists came, snapping photos among the grape leaves. The story faded from memory, becoming a strange little footnote in Napa folklore until the second harvest, until the discovery that would make the town stop breathing for a moment. But for now, the soil rested, holding its secret in her journal. Among the last scribbles, there was a half-written note. I think someone is watching me. Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe the sentence ended there. No punctuation, just a sudden stop mid-thought. Like someone had closed the page too quickly. Beneath the vines, something waited. Buried, forgotten, almost the clink of a metal spade. Against bone was so subtle, Mateo Ruiz almost dismissed it. He was turning the earth with his daughter, Camila, preparing the rows for new irrigation lines along the far northern slope. The vines here hadn't been touched in a while, left wild and twisting. Despite the Declare estate's obsession with symmetry, Vivian had ordered them ignored last season. To Rocky, she had said, not worth the labor, but Mateo knew better. Grapes didn't care about rocks. Grapes grew where the soil was warm and secrets ran deep. Camila knelt beside him, brushing loose dirt away from a tangle of roots. Her gloved hand froze. Papa, it's not wood. Mateo looked down, a curved shape, smooth, pale, a section of what appeared to be rib bone, tangled in vines like the earth was trying to keep it. His breath caught. His stomach turned to lead. By dusk, the entire northern slope was cordoned off with yellow tape. Sheriff Donnelly stood stiffly at the edge of the field, staring into the hole like it might speak. 2 forensic officers worked in silence, their gloved hands moving like surgeons over the loose earth. Bit by bit, they revealed more. A nearly complete human skeleton collapsed slightly at the ribs. The jaw was cracked. Soil-stained hair clung to the base of the skull. No clothing. Just a necklace chain, broken. Camila sat in the back of Mateo's pickup, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She was here the whole time, she whispered. Mateo didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the vines. They were taller than... They should have been healthier. Fruitful. It made his stomach twist. Sheriff. Donnelly asked Vivian Declare to return to the property. She arrived shortly before dark in her black Audi, sunglasses still perched on her face. This land has been in my family for 4 generations, she said, voice smooth as aged oak. I've never known it to grow bodies. The sarcasm didn't land. Do you remember a renter named Elena Marlowe? The sheriff asked. Vivian paused, then nodded slowly. Travel writer, wasn't she? Stayed for a week. It's a pretty quiet type. You reported no concern when she didn't check out. Vivian smiled, tight-lipped. She left her key on the table, assumed she'd caught an early flight. People come and go all the time, Sheriff. I don't track their every move. Donnelly didn't argue. Instead, he asked her for the guest records. She rolled her eyes. That old book. She waved a manicured hand. It's probably in the cellar with the broken corkscrews. That night, Donnelly found it himself beneath a pile of expired tourist brochures and dusty wine labels. The guest book was thick, bound in wine-stained leather, pages curled at the edges, hundreds of names scrawled over years, some in cursive, some in block letters, all innocent, until he turned to May 27th, 2021. Elena Marlowe neatly signed in dark blue ink. Her name was circled, not in the same ink, a red pen. A thin ring around the name like someone had been staring at it. Below her, one more entry, Adrian B. No phone, no noise, just the soil and me. The handwriting was jagged, almost carved. The next morning, Rachel Marlowe returned to the Vineyard. She stood just outside the yellow tape, fists trembling at her sides, trying to remain composed. Is it her? She asked Donnelly. We believe so. Rachel closed her eyes. 2 years of imagining her sister alive, hiding in South America. Off-grid by choice, sailing somewhere exotical, fell apart in one exhale. Someone put her here like trash, she said. Her voice didn't crack. Not yet. Inside the cottage Elena had once rented, the air felt stale. Like no one had touched anything since Donnelly offered Rachel the guest book. She flipped to her sister's page, tracing her name with her fingertip, then down to the red circle. And then Adrian B. Who is that? She asked. We don't know. Yet Donnelly replied, but he signed in the day after Elena. Rachel stared at the page. She mentioned someone. In her letters, said she met someone different. Someone who made her feel ... off balance. Off balance. How? She said. He made her feel seen in a way she didn't like. They found Elena's journal among her things still in evidence. Most of it was mundane. Descriptions of the land, the flavor profile of Vivienne Sierra, her thoughts on solitude. But deeper in, a different tone emerged. There's a man who walks the vines late. I see him from the window. He never looks up. But I know he knows I see him. He asked me what I think the earth hides. I didn't answer. He laughed and said, "Good. Some questions kill the ones who ask them." Donnelly read it twice, his fingers tightening around the spine. "Why wasn't this found sooner?" Rachel asked. Donnelly didn't answer. The question burned. Someone knew. Someone must have known. People don't vanish without others choosing to look away. That evening, Donnelly returned. To the slope, the forensic team had cleared out. Only markers remained, little yellow flags poking from the dirt like warnings. He walked slowly between the rows. The vines whispered in the wind. Too tall, too perfect. The grapes hung in thick, lush clusters, fertile, oversaturated, like the earth had fed on something unnatural, something human. Detective Isla Voss had a habit of silence, not the kind born from shyness, but the kind honed from years of listening before speaking. She leaned into rooms like smoke, quiet, watchful, suffocating when she needed to be. People rarely noticed her entering, but they always remembered when she left. She didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in unfinished things and told stories that festered in silence, until someone brave enough cut them open. And now she had one. Alina Marlowe. The morning fog hadn't lifted when Isla stepped onto the DeClaire property. She didn't bother with greetings. She went straight to the northern slope, stood just beyond the taped-off rows, and looked down at the dark soil. She was here for 2 years, she said, almost to herself, and no one heard a thing. Sheriff Donnelly, who'd worked with Illa on 2 prior cases, shrugged. Some places bury sound like bodies. She turned toward him, and some people let them. Inside the evidence room, Elena's belongings sat in 2 clear tubs. Her clothes, a pair of walking boots, her leather journal, a few used postcards with no stamps. The second tub, a faded Polaroid camera, and a manila folder labeled personal unsent. Isla opened it. Inside were 6 letters, torn. At the edges, some typed, some handwritten, none mailed. The first was to Rachel. "I'm okay, or pretending to be. This place is beautiful in a way that makes you ache. You'd love it, or maybe hate it. Depends which side of your heart wins." The second letter stopped after 2 lines. He came again. It says things that sound like poetry, but they bite underneath. "I laughed once and he told me my mouth looked better closed. No name, just he." Another letter, scribbled and furious, had been torn in half. Only the bottom half remained. "Like I'm his shadow. Like I don't get to exist unless he's in the light. I keep telling myself I'm being dramatic, but the way he watches me's not romance, it's ownership." Ela sat with that for a long moment. She had seen this before. Not the bruises, not the threats. It's a slow erasure. When a person stops saying a name aloud, hoping the silence will make it disappear. It never did. The last letter was different. Folded smaller than the others, tucked into the back of the folder. No salutation. It's no signature. Just 1 paragraph. "I think I understand now what love isn't. It isn't quiet when you cry. It doesn't wait until you sleep to slide into your dreams. And it doesn't look at you like you're a thing it forgot to destroy. If I vanish, Rachel, it's not because I wanted to." Isla closed the folder, her jaw clenched, her fingers tapped once against the desk. "This isn't a missing person case anymore," she whispered. "This is a slow murder one that started before the vines ever touched her." She requested Elena's digital files from her publisher collection of travel essays, drafts, and pitch emails. One stood out, a rejected story pitch titled, "The Taste of Power." When charm turns feral, it read like a metaphor. But Isla had learned to read metaphors like confessions in the piece. Alina described a man she met during a wine-tasting event in Sonoma. Charismatic, older, married. He called himself a master of subtleties. Said he could detect the difference between wounded sweetness and cultivated bitterness in a sip. They'd shared a late-night walk through a closed vineyard. He told her the grapes grow sweeter where people have bled, Isla underlined. That sentence, then circled it. She interviewed Elena's editor by phone. She had a gift for observing things no one else noticed. The woman said, but she stopped turning things in. Her last few notes were paranoid, like she was writing for someone who was watching over her shoulder. Isla asked about the man in the pitch. Any name? No, the editor replied. But Elena told me once that, he said, my wife owns the land, but I own the silence. That stayed with me. I didn't ask more. Isla blinked slowly. His wife? Yes. Elena said she met the wife too. Briefly, said she was stunning. Cold, like glass that would shatter if you looked too closely. Later that evening, Isla sat in Elena's old cottage. The place was exactly as Rachel had left it. Tea mug still on the windowsill. Folded blanket on the couch, Elena's scent faded into the wood. She picked up the journal again, flipped to the est. Last full entry. He knows I'm leaving. I think that's what scares him. Not the loss, the choice. I wish someone would ask me what I'm afraid of. I'd say, being rewritten into someone I'm not. Outside the window, the vines swayed gently, but Isla didn't look away. She kept staring, watching the rose as if something might shift, and then something did. A man at the edge of the vines, just standing, tall, still, watching the cottage. By the time she opened the door, he was gone, but the dirt where he stood was freshly disturbed. The first time, Detective Isla Voss saw Adrian Bellamy's face. It wasn't in a police file or a photo ID. It was in a blur caught on the edge of a wine festival photograph. The image was warm and bright. It's full of smiles and clinking glasses. A group of tourists posed in front of a Declare Vineyard banner, holding complimentary tasting flutes. But in the far left corner, partially out of frame, was a man in shadow. Tall, lean, a wine towel over one shoulder, looking straight into the camera, not smiling. It's almost as if he knew he wasn't supposed to be captured. When Isla zoomed in, the resolution fractured. But the eyes stayed sharp, cold, calculating, watching. Adrian Bellamy had once been a star. Before the headlines, before the arrest. He was considered a wine prodigy, sommelier with a palate so refined he could identify the altitude of a grape by scent alone. He had worked in Paris, New York, and then vanished from the fine dining world after a quiet scandal, a harassment claim. Quickly buried by an NDA and money, then came the second allegation, then the third. That was when he fled the cities. He resurfaced. In Napa briefly, working odd jobs under aliases. Word of mouth said he drifted through vineyards, helping with harvests, trading labor for shelter and wine. One of those vineyards, Isla now suspected, was Declare. Never heard of him, Vivian, Declare said, sipping a glass of her 2019 Sarah, and I'm very aware of who works my land. They were seated in her tasting room, modern, glass-walled, and cold as her voice. The smell of barrel-aged oak lingered faintly. Isla placed the festival photo on the table. Vivian didn't flinch. He could have been helping one of the vendors, she said smoothly. We host outside staff all the time. Did you interview them afterward? Isla asked. Vivian tilted her head. Detective, do you think I keep records of every face that pours wine at a booth? Isla didn't reply. She just watched her. Vivian leaned back. My ex-husband may have met him. Louis always loved ... strays. Louis Martian, former wine consultant. Once married to Vivian, charming, arrogant, often drunk by 3 p.m. When Isla called him, he answered from what sounded like a dockside bar. Adrian, he said, voice slurred with nostalgia. Sure, quiet guy. Knew his grapes. Had this creepy intensity, like he was in love with everything he drank. Did he work at Declare? Unofficially? He helped during harvest. Vivian hated him, said he made the vines feel wrong. Illa's ears sharpened. Why?
Elise.
Chuckled. She claimed the Sierra turned bitter when he was around. Superstitious crap. But he got under people's skin. Did he know Elena Marlowe? There was a pause. A long one, I think so. Louis finally said. She came to one of the festivals. I remember her face. Gentle, kind of guarded. Adrian noticed her. You could feel it. Did they speak? Think they walked the rows once, just before sunset. He had this thing about showing people the womb of the vine. Sounded poetic. Felt predatory. Back in the station, Isla requested employment logs from Declare Estate for 2021. Adrian. Bellamy's name didn't appear anywhere. No tax forms, no contracts, no trace. But one of the Vineyard's former foremen, Mateo Ruiz, remembered something. There was a guy who didn't clock in, Mateo said. Came with Louis, said he was an unofficial Somalian resident. Wore all black. Kept to himself. Did he ever talk to Alina? Mateo paused. I saw them once. Just once.
Oh.
She was writing in her journal. He crouched next to her, whispering something. She laughed, but not the good kind.
What kind?
The kind where you want someone to go away, but you're scared they won't. Isla traced Adrian's last confirmed sighting 2-3 days after Alina vanished. Wine distributor recalled him showing up at dawn with a bottle of unlabeled red and asking if they wanted to buy a private vintage. Said he looked jumpy, like he hadn't slept, then dashed gone. No bank activity, no cell signal, no credit cards. Like he dissolved into the vineyards, just like Alina had. Only Alina resurfaced 2 years too late. That night, Ila returned to the cottage. Something about Elena's journal still felt unfinished. She flipped again to the pages describing the unnamed man. He talks like he wants to be inside your thoughts. Not your heart, not your body, your thoughts. He asked me what word I'd use to describe myself. I said incomplete. He smiled and said, Good, that makes you harvestable. Harvestable, the word twisted in her gut. She kept flipping until she found a loose page folded into the back cover. It was different. Words, random, scattered, tannin, blindfold, ash, dig, skin under nails, no. Underneath, if I disappear, start with the man and the grapes. La leaned back. She didn't know what scared her more, how specific Alina had been, or how long no one had listened. Vivian Declare did not like to be summoned. She arrived at the sheriff's office in a tailored navy coat. Deep red lipstick perfectly applied. Her silver hair wound tight at the back of her neck like a noose. She smelled faintly of lavender and wine barrels. Everything about her said control. Detective Isla Voss stood behind the one-way glass. Watching her enter the interview room, Vivian didn't fidget. Didn't scan the walls or complain about the cold metal chair. She simply folded her gloved hands, crossed one leg over the other, and waited. She's not afraid, Isla said. Sheriff Donnelly beside her exhaled. Or she's just used to being obeyed. Inside the room, the recorder clicked on. Vivian Isla began calmly. You said before you didn't remember Elena Marlowe. Vivian gave a soft smile. That's correct. She was one of many guests that summer. I don't keep mental files on tourists. She stayed for 7 nights, signed the guest book, shared wine with your ex-husband, walked your private vineyard. Shrugged slightly, and then disappeared. I'm aware. But I wasn't her keeper, detective. I assumed she left early. Ila placed a photo on the table. Elena's face, smiling faintly. Sun behind her. Do you remember this woman walking through your vines barefoot at dawn? She asked. Do you remember your staff talking about her? Do you remember the man who lingered near her cabin, Adrian Bellamy? Vivian didn't blink. I remember that my vines grew poorly that year. I remember a late frost, but I don't remember Adrian Bellamy. Sla studied her. What do you remember about the week after Elena vanished? Vivian's gaze cooled. I remember the press bothering me. I remember canceling one of our harvest events out of respect. And I remember losing money. You also fired 5 workers without warning, Isla said. No severance. No exit interviews. No paper trail. Vivian tilted her head. Temporary hires. Contractors. That's not unusual. One of them was Adrian. Vivian leaned back slowly. I have no record of him. That's the point, Isla said quietly. You erased him. Later that afternoon, Isla met with Mateo Ruiz behind the equipment shed. The grape leaves rustled above them. But the wind had shifted. Everything felt heavier. She's lying, Mateo said. About Adrian. About everything. Tell me what you saw. Mateo hesitated, glanced around, then spoke low. Adrian was ... strange. Too quiet. Didn't take orders. Walked the vineyard. Like it belonged to him. He and Vivian had words one night. She found him alone near the trellis where Alina liked to sit. What did she say to him? Didn't hear. But I saw her face, like stone. And the next morning, he was gone. Did you tell anyone at the time? Mateo shook his head. Vivian doesn't like questions. People who ask too many don't last long here. Back in the office, Isla pulled employee records for the previous 3 harvest seasons. On paper, everything looked clean. The turnover rate was high, but contracts were marked terminated upon completion. No complaints.
Wow.
No anomalies. Just a rotating door of forgotten names. Until she came across a note tucked between HR emails. A resignation letter from a seasonal worker dated June 4th, 2021. I don't feel safe here. Something isn't right with the man in the black shirt. He says he doesn't sleep, said the vines like the taste of quiet girls. No name signed. Just a scribbled initial M. Isla closed her eyes. Elena had described that same phrase in her journal. He said the vines like the taste of quiet girls. The next morning, Isla returned to the Vineyard not as a detective. But as a guest, Vivian's tasting room was filled with couples, tourists, and curated charm. Vivian greeted each with practiced warmth, never missing a beat. Her eyes lingered on Isla just a moment too long. They sat across from each other near a display of wine awards. You think I buried that girl myself? Vivian said, voice low, wine glass swirling in hand. I think someone you trusted did, Isla replied, and I think you helped them disappear. Vivian chuckled, eyes hard. And here I thought you'd be clever. She wrote about you, Isla said. Not directly. But you're in there, cold as steel, smelled like mint and wine. She said you watched her once, as if measuring her. Vivian didn't deny it. She said you looked like a woman who knew where things should be buried. Vivian's fingers stilled on her glass. Tell me something, detective, she said softly. If you found out that someone had stepped too close to something sacred, someone uninvited, ungrateful, and careless, would you let them trample everything you built? Isla leaned in. Did Elena trample something, or did she see something? You wanted kept underground? Vivian stood. Her smile returned. Enjoy the Sarah, detective. It pairs well with silence. Outside, Isla stood among the vines again, the same section where Elena had once walked barefoot. Writing in her journal, she knelt beside a twisted root and placed her palm on the earth. Something in this ground reeked of history, of arrogance, of things buried not just in dirt but in entitlement. Elena hadn't vanished. She had been removed, and someone had expected the vineyard to drink her, cup and forget. The sun rose blood orange over the hills the summer after Elena disappeared. The vineyard looked like any other Napa dream lush, golden, gently humming with cicadas. But row 18 told a different story. That's where the smell began. Mateo Ruiz still remembered it. Sour, iron-tanged rot that clung to the air, no matter. The wind. Workers joked at first some animal must have died under the vines. Maybe a deer or a wild boar. It wasn't unusual. But this smell was different. To human. It's just the heat pulling up old mulch, Vivian DeClaire had said. The first day, the complaints reached her. Keep watering. The grapes don't seem to mind, but they did. That section struggled. Leaves curled at the edges. Grapes came in small and bitter. It was the only part of the vineyard that refused to flourish. Mateo's father, Miguel Longtime, foreman before cancer hollowed him, had pulled Mateo aside one evening. She's hiding something, he said in Spanish, his voice rasping in the dusk. That woman's not afraid of bad soil. She's afraid of something buried. Weeks later, a landscaping crew arrived. Not the usual local workers, but but men from out of town. They came with industrial tillers and fresh topsoil, and worked only. At night, Vivian said it was to avoid disrupting the daily tours. But the workers knew better. By morning, row 18 had been scraped down to its bones. New soil, new compost. New roots, it was like a second burial, and that fall. The vines in row 18 bloomed, full-bodied, heavy fruit, almost eager. Vivian named the wine Resurgence, Latin for rising again. Critics called it haunting, a vintage with shadow. In its throat, one reviewer wrote, unapologetically dark, lingers longer than it should. Back in the present, Detective Isla Voss stood exactly where the vines had once withered. Row 18 looked perfect now, lush, green, thriving. But the dirt beneath her boots felt too soft. Two newly born Mateos stood beside her, the lines on his face, deeper than before, pointed to a slight dip in the ground between posts 9 and 11. That's where the smell was strongest, said. That's where they dug. Did anyone see what they pulled out? Mateo shook his head. They worked fast. When the soil trucks came, Vivian ordered everyone off the field, said we'd be docked if we interfered. Isla crouched, ran her gloved fingers through the dirt. The soil was rich, dense, almost too healthy, as if something in it had fed the vines more than compost. Later, La returned to her office and reopened Elena's final notebook. Most pages were sketches of vines, morning light, notes about wine, but on the back page, nearly torn away, was a rough drawing. A single row of grapes, marked with stars above certain posts. She counted them 9, 10, 11, the exact spot next to the sketch. Lena had written, "This row hums differently, like something beneath it is trying to speak." That evening, Isla called the local coroner's office and asked for the autopsy details from the bones recovered near the trellis. Dr. Mihalikis hesitated. We only found partial remains, mostly vertebrae, ribs, fragments of femur. Skull never surfaced. What? About decomposition estimates? Around 18 to 24 months. But here's the strange part. The bones, they were clean. Clean. No animal markings. No signs of weathering. As if they'd been groomed or digested. Isla went cold. By what? We can't say. But whatever happened, it wasn't just time. The next morning, Isla visited a retired botanist, Professor Genevieve Hallstrom, who once consulted on unusual vineyard behavior. She showed her photos of the grapevines in row 18, pre- and post-renewal. Hallstrom examined them in silence. Vitis vinifera, she finally said. They're sensitive. They remember trauma. These vines look revitalized, yes, but also altered. Faster growth, thicker stems, slightly purpled leaf veins, meaning something biological shifted. It happens sometimes after fire war. Unusual fertilization? Unusual how? Hallstrom glanced up. Human remains, for example. Bodies have nitrogen, calcium, potassium, in theory if decomposed in the root zone. Yes. It could create aggressive regrowth. Illa's stomach churned. You're saying? I'm saying if someone wanted to hide a body, this would be a near-perfect way, especially if they planned to replace the evidence with new roots. That night, Isla walked row 18 alone. She touched the vines. They were warm under her fingers. Not from sun, but from within. She whispered Elena's name, and the wind rustled the leaves back, as if listening. For the first time, Isla felt afraid not just of who had done this, but of what had grown from it. At the edge of the vineyard, a plaque gleamed under a new light. It marked Resurgence, the vintage's debut. Elena had vanished. Her bones had fed the vines. And now, her silence had been bottled. The knock came just after dawn. Detective Isla Voss opened her office door to find a woman standing there, shoulders squared against the weight of the world.
Ice.
Auburn hair pulled back, travel-worn coat still dusted with sleep and road grit. Her eyes, gray, rimmed with exhaustion, ever blinked as she introduced herself. Rachel Marlowe. Elena was my sister, Isla ushered her in. Rachel didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She laid a folder on the table and said simply, "You don't know half of who my sister was?" Not even close. Inside the folder were letters handwritten, ink faded, postmarked from regions across California wine country. They were addressed to Rachel, but never mailed. She'd found them tucked behind Elena's bookshelf after she disappeared. Isla read. In silence, he says I taste better than his Chardonnay. He says I overthink, and that's why I don't let myself be happy. He books rooms under fake names. No one ever sees us together. Who's he? Isla asked. Rachel looked out the window. She never wrote it. Never once. I know who. She pulled out a single photo, grainy. A man in a tailored suit, wine glass in hand, speaking at a Napa Vineyard panel from 5 years ago. Written on the back, L. Martian, Louis Martian. Ella said aloud. Rachel nodded. Vivian declares, ex-husband. Elena met him while reviewing a string of boutique wineries. Said he understood her need to disappear into places, into flavors, but he made her doubt everything. Made her feel small, then he vanished. Isla leaned back, mind spinning. Louis Martian, once a renowned vintner with a flair for blending. French tradition and California innovation. He'd coned Declare vineyards with Vivian before their split amicable on paper. Quietly toxic behind closed doors, he disappeared from the wine world 3 years ago, officially. He moved to Italy, unofficially. He simply faded. Rachel continued. Elena followed him here. She wouldn't admit it, but I know. She stopped calling. Her last voicemail was rambling nervous. She said something like, he says this vintage will fix everything. And then ... nothing. La visited the courthouse archives. The divorce files between Vivian and Louis were sealed, but tucked in a real estate transaction from that same year was a line of interest. Louis Marchand relinquishes all claim to Declare vineyards in exchange for a lump. Settlement and intellectual property. No one gives up Napa soil, that is, lest they're hiding something bigger. Isla called Vivian. The vineyard owner answered after the 5th ring. Detective? Something new? You know where your ex-husband is? Pause. A soft inhale. I haven't spoken to Louis in over 2 years. Our worlds no longer intersect. Did he know Elena? Silence. Then, if he did, I doubt it meant anything. I'm not asking what it meant, I'm asking what it cost. Vivian didn't respond. Ela heard a faint click. The line went dead. That evening, Rachel walked row 18. She stood among the vines. Her sister may have fed. She reached out and touched the grapes growing fat on secrets. She always chose men who made her feel invisible, Rachel said quietly. Louis was the worst. The charming ones always are. Ela held up the notebook again, the sketch of the row. The whispered lines Elena never shared aloud. He says, this place will swallow who I used to be. She wasn't just here for the writing, Rachel added. She was trying to belong. To someone who never saw her? Somehow that desperation led her into Vivian's vineyard. Into Louis's world and into the ground. Digging deeper. Isla found old marketing flyers, Declare vineyard brochures from years past. One listed Louis Martian as a consultant for soil blending and grape DNA hybridization. Another contained a photo Louis standing beside a trellis, hands stained with dirt, and just behind him, out of focus. A figure. Isla zoomed in. It was Elena, hair tied back, notebook in hand. Eyes wide, not fear. Ah. Isla returned to her car and pulled up travel. Records. There was one hotel, a small inn just outside Napa, that Elena visited multiple times before she disappeared. Under different names, so did Louis. They booked adjoining rooms, always under aliases, always paid in cash. At the inn, Isla found a housekeeper who remembered them. She was nervous, the woman recalled. He wasn't mean, just controlled the air in the room, like even silence had to go through him. Hey, did you ever see them together? Once, on the back porch, she was crying. He held her face and said, no one else will love you this much. Don't ruin it. Back at her motel, Rachel flipped through her sister's last letter. There was a line that kept sticking. If I disappear, don't let them turn me into a story they can sell in bottles. Rachel folded it with trembling fingers. They did, she whispered. That night, Isla ordered a fresh search of Louis Marchand's last known property. A cottage near Heldsburg, abandoned, overgrown, untouched in years. Inside, under a floorboard, they found wine labels, hand-drawn, unreleased. Each bore the same name, Elon Perdue, Lost Spirit. And in the margins, scribbled in Elena's handwriting, he said this one was mine. The autopsy room always smelled faintly of bleach and resignation. Detective Isla Voss stood beside the coroner, arms crossed tightly over her chest as the examination began. Elena Marlowe's remains lay on the stainless steel table bones, fragile, curled inward, as if still trying to protect themselves from the weight of the earth. You said you had something, Ela asked, her voice low. Doctor. Penelope Gray, the county's forensic pathologist, pulled down her magnifying goggles. More than something. What I'm about to tell you changes everything. She angled the examination lamp. First, the position. The skeletal curvature of her spine, her bent arms, it's all indicative of live burial. She wasn't dumped. She was placed. Alive. Isla's throat clenched. Penelope nodded. And fighting. See here? She pointed to the phalange Salona's fingers, or what was left of them. The nail beds have soil impact and slight scratch abrasion, classic signs of clawing upward. She was trying to dig her way out. Isla swallowed the bile rising in her throat. What else? Penelope moved to a petri dish beside the body. We found embedded fragments under her nails, large topsoil, as expected. But also this. She tapped a slide under the microscope. Human skin cells. Male. The DNA sequencing is underway. Isla blinked. Scratched someone as she died. No, not during a struggle. The orientation suggests contact before the final moments. Palm side trace, meaning she was held. Isla stared at the bones, her mind reeling. Someone was there, with her, watching her die. Later that day, Isla stood among the vineyard rows, once more 018, now taped off, scarred by excavation. She knelt, pushing her fingers into the disturbed soil. It crumbled easily, rich, fertile, and now cursed. What kind of person stands over a breathing woman and waits for the soil to suffocate her? Who comforts someone while they bury them alive, or worse, enjoys it? The forensic report arrived that evening. The male DNA matched a partial sample found years ago in the Eau Claire wine cellar on a corking handle used during a private bottling session. Name Louis Marchand. Isla slammed her palm against the desk. He had been here in that vineyard. With Elena, just as Rachel suspected. But there was more. One section of the report was flagged with urgency. It read, also found trace elements of benzodiazepine, residue in the soil under the remains. High likelihood of administered sedative. Prior to burial, Ela reread the line. He drugged her first, made her weak, then buried her alive, and stayed to listen. She stared at the wine label. Elon Perdue. Elon Perdue. Lost Spirit. The name wasn't poetic. It was prophetic. A woman trying to escape a man who wanted to possess her even in death. The next day, Isla tracked down a former De Clare Vineyard handa, soft-spoken man named René, who had worked bottling for special clients over black coffee. In long pauses, René recalled a night he never understood. It was during a private harvest. A late-night session, just a few of us. Louis was there, drunk on something deeper than wine. He told Vivian he was bottling something new. A resurrection, he called it. Did you see Elena? No, but I heard crying from the fermentation room. Did you report it? René looked down. We were told never to question what happened during the special pressings. Vivian said it was passion. Said genius makes noise when it ferments. That evening, Isla stood once again in Vivian de Clare's office, the vineyard owner. Swirled a glass of Pinot Noir but did not drink. You've been lying, Eva said plainly. Vivian said nothing. Elena didn't disappear. She was murdered. And not just murdered, buried alive. Vivian's eyes didn't flinch. And Louis, Isla pressed. Louis is no longer part of this vineyard, Vivian said smoothly. That doesn't mean he's no longer yours. Vivian finally set the glass down. Detective, in the world of wine, vintage is everything. Some harvests are too bold, too volatile. You bottle them, or they ruin the whole cellar. Is that what you did to Alina? Isla snapped. Bottle her story before it could explode. Vivian only smiled. It chilled Isla more than a scream. Later that night, Isla sat in her motel room, staring at the soil sample under a borrowed microscope. Dark. Luscious. Almost purple. She thought of Alina clawing through it, breathing it, tasting it, dying in it. The taste of dirt, Isla whispered. She died in a vineyard, and they tried to make her part of the terroir. The phrase chilled her to the bone. Alina hadn't just been silenced. She'd been absorbed. Just after midnight, Rachel called. I remembered something. Isla sat up. What is it? Alina sent me a message. Weird one. It's 2 words right before she went to Napa. I never understood them until now. What were they, blind tasting? The DeClaire Estate's courtyard glittered beneath. Strings of Edison bulbs and the shimmer of crystal glasses. Gilded lanterns cast a warm hue over the long oak table, adorned with silver place settings and garnet-colored wine. Soft jazz filtered through the air, blending with the hum of laughter and clinking cutlery. It was the annual harvest dinner a night for Napa's elite to toast the land, the vintage, and themselves. Detective Isla Voss stepped cautiously into the dream. Her hair was curled, her makeup subtle, her dress sleek black velvet, borrowed. Identity hung on her shoulders. Olivia Sloan, sommelier, consultant from Sonoma. Her badge and voice recorder stayed hidden beneath silk. Across the table, Vivian DeClaire raised her glass, standing tall in a deep burgundy gown that shimmered like poured wine. So the grapes, she declared, and the stories they keep. Polite laughter followed. A waiter! Refilled glasses. Isla watched, eyes scanning for her target. Louis Martian. He sat 2 seats away, slightly slouched, his cufflinks glinting under the lights. His face was flushed, eyes glassy already deep into his second bottle. His fingers played with the stem of his glass, restless, twitching. Isla took her first sip of the house Merlot, letting the taste linger. Oak, blackberry, something darker beneath. The wine was exquisite. It felt poisoned by the company. Halfway through the evening, Isla excused herself and stepped onto the stone terrace. The night was crisp. She reached into her clutch and activated the voice recorder tucked in her bra strap. Her skin buzzed with adrenaline. She didn't wait long. Louis wandered out after her, cradling a nearly empty bottle. I remember you, he slurred. Isla turned. Do you? You're one of hers, aren't you? He asked. Vivian Sens. Spies now? She used to just ruin people the old-fashioned way. I'm a guest, just enjoying the wine. He laughed bitterly. Wine, right? His smile wobbled, and he leaned against the railing. You know the soil here? Best in the valley? You know why? She stayed silent. It's the rot, he said, tapping his glass. Things die here, dear. Rabbits, people. The ground remembers. You can taste it. Isla's fingers clenched around her clutch. I didn't mean to let it happen. She was just... He paused, swaying. Too real. Too loud. Vivian hates that, Elena, Isla asked softly. He froze. His gaze snapped to her. What name? Did you just say Elena Marlowe? Louis exhaled, long and sharp. Then he laughed. God, she was beautiful and angry. Kept asking questions, snooping into the wine records. She saw something. Something Vivian didn't want seen. You? Isla asked. What did you want? His voice dropped. I wanted her to leave. But not like that. He downed the last of his wine. Later, back in her motel room, Isla replayed the recording 3 times. The most damning part was barely audible, Louis muttering. I told her not to go to the cellar. Told her Vivian had rules. She went anyway. She thought she could write the truth and walk away. Isla paused the recording. There it is. Intent. Regret. witness, but no rescue. The next morning, Isla returned to the vineyard. This time, not as Olivia Sloane. She walked straight into Vivian's office. Vivian stood at the window, swirling a glass of Cabernet. Her calm was armor. "I heard you enjoyed the dinner." "I did," Isla replied. "And the confession?" Vivian's head turned slowly. "Louis talks too much when he drinks. Always has." Illa placed the voice recorder on the desk between them. "I could get a warrant right now." Vivian took a long sip. "You won't." "Why?" "Because that vineyard out there employs 70 families. Because tourists come here by the busload. Because judges drink my wine and donors dine at my table." Isla stepped forward. "You covered up a murder." Vivian's expression didn't change. "I protected the harvest." Between them, like a pulled thread, Vivian said quietly, "Grapes don't grow sweeter when you baby them. They need stress, struggle, starvation. A little suffering in the vine makes a better vintage." Illa stared at her. "So you starved Alina of oxygen?" Vivian's smile barely touched her lips. "I didn't bury her. No, you just stood back and let the soil close." Vivian stepped closer. "Detective, let me give you a final toast." She raised her glass. "To the things we plant and the stories that feed them." That evening, Illa emailed a secure copy of the recording to the DA's office, then another to the press just in case. She sat alone in her motel, surrounded by the sounds of silence. The harvest was over, but justice was just beginning to bloom. The morning after the harvest dinner, a fog hung low over the DeClaire vineyard, blanketing the earth in a thick, cotton-like silence. Detective Isla Voss returned alone, a warrant yet no backup, just instinct and something Louis had said while drunk. She went to the cellar. She never came back up. The vineyard's main tasting room was quiet. No guests, no workers yet. Isla walked the perimeter, eyes trailing the old stone walls, till she found the section with the vintage portraits, photos of Vivian shaking hands with mayors, sommeliers, and journalists. One photo was slightly crooked. Beneath it, scuff marks on the wood floor. Ila nudged the frame. It shifted easily, revealing a recessed keyhole behind it. She glanced around, then used her pocket knife to jimmy it open. A soft click and a hatch groaned open. Beneath the floorboards, the stairs were narrow, lined with stone, and descended into a damp, musty coldness. The air was thick with mildew and wine-soaked earth. As she reached the bottom, her flashlight illuminated rows of dusty bottles resting in racks carved into the walls, labels dating back decades. Sit. Sat beside a small table with 2 glasses still resting on it. One had dried red residue at the bottom. The other was shattered on the floor, nearby, half buried in the dust. Something small glinted under her flashlight beam. She knelt. A silver locket, its chain twisted, the clasp bent. Isla wiped the dirt from it and popped it open. Inside, a photo of 2 young women smiling at the camera, Lena and her sister Rachel, etched inside the lid. M. Isla swallowed hard. This was the last place Alina had been. She spotted an old cabinet tucked behind a wine barrel. Inside, stacked neatly, were surveillance hard drives, marked by date. Most of them were dusty and untouched, but 3 were missing. She found the empty slots labeled August 14, August 15, August 16. The days Alina disappeared. She grabbed the nearest present drive, August 13th, and rushed back to her car. Back at the station, Isla brought the drive to the tech unit. Within an hour, she had something. The tasting room's camera showed routine operations staff pouring samples, tourists snapping selfies. But the feed from the cellar was different. The footage was grainy, monochrome, shot from a static angle. High in the corner, it was time-stamped, August 13th, 6:02 p.m. Alina entered the frame. She looked nervous, clutching a notepad, her expression tight. She glanced behind her, then stepped deeper inside. 1 minute later, Vivian Duclair followed her. They exchanged words, though no sound came through. Vivian stood stiff, cold. Alina paced. She pointed at a wine bottle, then at something off-screen. Vivian stepped closer, too close. Then suddenly, Elena flinched. Another figure entered from the shadows. Adrian. Bellamy. He wasn't dressed like a worker. His face looked pale under the cellar lights. He reached toward Alina, who tried to back away. The screen flickered. The footage stuttered. Then went dark, corrupted, but enough had survived. 3 people had entered. Only 2 were ever seen again. Isla stared at the screen, bile rising in her throat. Adrian was never documented as being on the premises. No payroll, no guest log. But there he was, as real as the cellar dust. She printed stills, dated, labeled, time to confront. Vivian again. Vivian was waiting. She didn't offer wine this time. You've been in my cellar, she said coolly. Yes, Isla replied, placing the photo of Alina on the desk. And she was too. Gavian's jaw tightened. You didn't erase everything, Isla continued. The camera caught enough, and I found this. She placed the locket on the desk. Vivian stared at it. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't touch it. Why bring her there? I asked. She insisted. Vivian said finally. She wanted the truth about Louis, about the estate's finances. She thought she was being clever. You brought Adrian. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Adrian wasn't mine. Louis brought him in. Said he owed him something. Adrian's missing. Vivian shrugged. Some people know when to vanish, others don't. Why delete the footage? Isla pressed. To keep the press from devouring what little piece I have left, she snapped. This vineyard, this legacy, it's built on discretion. Alina wanted to rip that apart. She was reporting a story, not committing a crime. She was the story, Vivian said quietly. And stories like hers rot, like deer under the vines. Isla stood. We found her body, she said. Buried in your soil. I didn't put her there, Vivian replied, almost whispering. But I did nothing to stop it. Later that evening, Isla drove to Rachel Marlowe's apartment. She didn't bring the locket. She brought the footage. Rachel cried silently. As she watched it, hand pressed to her mouth, she knew something, Rachel whispered. Something about Vivian and Louis. There were payments being funneled from the vineyard to accounts overseas. Alina thought it was trafficking. Isla looked up sharply. Human trafficking? I don't know, Rachel said. But she found a list. Names. She told me they weren't all guests. Isla felt her pulse shift. That changed everything. She called Mateo the next morning. That guest book you mentioned. Can I see it again? Shh. He met her at the back office near the workers' quarters. The book was thick with dust, its spine, cracked guest names written in beautiful cursive. Elena's name was still circled in red, but now Isla noticed something else. The same last name appeared 3 times. Different first names, same handwriting. No records of their departure. She traced her finger down the page. One of them had stayed on. August 12th. The day before Alina walked into the cellar and vanished. Vivian Duclair was arrested at dawn. Vineyard was still cloaked in mist as federal agents swept across the estate, their boots crunching on the dew-covered gravel. Isla stood near the gates watching Vivian composed. Dressed in a crisp ivory coat, stepped silently into the back of a black SUV. No cuffs, no fight, just silence, like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror 1,000 times. Louis Marchand was nowhere. To be found, his estate in Sonoma stood empty. His office in Bordeaux answered with stiff French denials. A last-minute flight to Paris had left the night before. No extradition agreement. He had vanished across the sea, just like the vintages. He once boasted about justice, Isla thought. Wasn't always served. Sometimes it evaporated. Like cheap wine left open too long, the search through the Duclair estate unearthed what Alina couldn't speak out loud. Tucked beneath the floorboards of her old guest room where she had stayed while interviewing, Vivian was a weather-worn leather journal, pages crinkled from condensation. the ink warped in places but legible. The first entry read, Day 2. Vivian offered me a Merlot that tasted like regret. There's something here. Not just old vines and trophy walls. The workers don't make eye contact. There were pages filled with not just wine notes but names, mysterious payments. Initials cross-referenced against shipping manifests from the vineyard. Some entries were just emotions scrawled with shaky hands. Adrian's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Why does Louis come here when Vivian isn't home? Something is rotting here and it's not the grapes. That played one of Elena's voice notes. Her voice was soft, tired. If anything happens to me, ... Don't blame the soil. Blame the roots. The real ones. The kind that bind money, secrecy, and power together like a noose. I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid to disappear. Rachel helped piece the rest. Together, Elena had uncovered financial inconsistencies between the vineyard's product sales and its reported revenue. A side operation. Some of the wines were never sold. They were marked gifted to collectors. But the names of these collectors didn't match any wine buyers or connoisseurs. In her notes, Elena wrote, Wine gifts equals code? Smuggling? Maybe people? God, I hope not. But why did these names show up on missing persons forums? Was this theory that had gotten her killed? Not the affair? Not even the argument in the cellar? It was the truth she chased. Too close, too raw. Too dangerous, the vineyard closed indefinitely. The press called it Napa's Dark Harvest. There were headlines, interviews, speculation. True crime podcasters camped outside the gates, desperate for a photo of Vivian in cuffs. But Isla stayed out of the spotlight. This wasn't about glory. This was about the girl who didn't want to be forgotten. Elena's funeral was held beneath a low-hanging gray sky beside the Pacific. Not a church, not a vineyard. Just waves and wind. Rachel read a letter her sister had written but never sent. You always said I was chasing ghosts. But sometimes ghosts are more honest than the living. If I don't make it back, no, I walked. Into the fire because I couldn't pretend not to feel the heat anymore. Isla didn't cry during the service. Not when Rachel broke down, not when they lowered the ashes into the ground. But that night, at her desk, she played the last file Elena had recorded. A whisper. Just a breath. If they bury me, make sure. The vines don't win. Ela wept. She returned to the vineyard once, weeks later. The property was still locked by police tape and neglect. Ivy had begun curling over the gates. The once pristine tasting room sat silent, the windows dusty. But the vines? They still grew green, lush, thriving in the cursed soil that had hidden a body. Illa walked between the rows, her boots brushing against the gravel. She stopped at the section where Elena had been buried. There was no marker, no flowers, just turned earth. She knelt, dug her fingers into the dirt, still rich with Merlot, still heavy, but no longer silent. Back in her office, Illa placed the locket cleaned and polished into an evidence box. Not to bury it, but to preserve it. Elena's initials would live in that cold silver. Her words in that journal. Her breath in that last voice note. She had not vanished. She had been buried, alive. But now she was seen. The gates of Declare Vineyard groaned open for the first time in nearly 6 years. Rust flaked from the iron hinges as Rachel stepped through, her daughter's small hand wrapped tightly around hers. The girl looked around wide at the rows of green, still thriving despite the scandal, the rot, and the blood beneath them. The air was thick with the scent of grapes, lavender, and memory. The vineyard had changed hands twice since Vivian. Declare's arrest. Its name had changed, to now Cypress Run Estate, an attempt at rebirth. But no amount of branding could scrub the ghosts from its soil. Rachel didn't care about the rebrand. She had come for one reason, closure. They reached the old East Field, where the vines once yielded Merlot deep as dried blood. A wooden plaque now marked the spot. In memory of Elena Rachel Voss, her voice outlived the silence. Beneath it, a single vine newly planted, lovingly tended, twisted toward the sun. Rachel knelt beside it. Her daughter Ava stood close, playing with a ribbon on her dress, occasionally glancing at her mother. The soil still smelled rich, damp, alive, Rachel whispered. She hated Merlot, said it always left a bitter aftertaste. The wind stirred. Flashbacks came in fragments. Alina laughing in the rain outside a tasting room. Alina arguing on the phone with a publisher who wanted her to tone down her reviews. Alina scribbling notes furiously in the margins of a wine-stained notebook. She was always reaching for truth, even when it cost her everything. Rachel dug her fingers into the ground, almost reflexively brushing the dirt around the memorial vine. Her palm hit something solid, not stone, not root plastic, she frowned, digging deeper. Out came a jagged fragment of a phone case, scratched, faded, but still visible beneath. The grime was a corner of a sticker, Alina's signature celestial theme, a tiny constellation decal. Rachel's. Breath hitched. It was hers. Alina's single quotes. She turned the shard over in her hands, heart thudding. It had been years since the body was exhumed, since the case was closed, since Isla had locked the last box of evidence in a cabinet labeled resolved. Maybe it wasn't. Rachel felt the soil shift under her knees, like something below. Still breathed. The vines grew icily here not because of the earth, but despite it, they weren't fed by sunlight alone. They drank memory, grief, guilt, everything that was never confessed. Later that evening, Rachel sat on the porch of the guest house, overlooking the vineyard, the phone fragment laid on the table in front of her. Ave had fallen asleep beside her, curled under a blanket, safe, and warm in a world that now knew Elena's name. Rachel sipped a glass of water, not wine. She couldn't stomach the vineyard's products anymore. She pulled out an envelope from her bag. Something Detective Isla Voss had mailed her 5 years ago and told her to open only when she was ready. Tonight, inside was a folded letter. And a photo. The photo showed a security camera still from the root cellar at the moment before Alina vanished. She stood between Vivian and Adrian, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. There was a second person in the frame too, but their face was blurred, the footage damaged, the image inconclusive. The letter was from Isla. Rachel, I can't prove who that fourth person was. Not yet, but I believe Alina knew. She hid things in places no one looked, beneath wallpaper and camera rolls, even in wine bottles she labeled as not for review. If you ever return to the vineyard, trust the small things. She did. I led the next morning. Rachel wandered the old fermentation building. It had been partially restored, new floorboards, new barrels, but the bones of the place were still the same. She paused by a dusty shelf of retired bottles. Most were dated and corked, but one stood out, its label peeled, the bottle still sealed, but with a small handwritten note beneath it. Not for review. Rachel's fingers trembled as she lifted it. A chill traveled down her spine. She didn't open it, not yet. But she would. At home, with Isla, where it was safe, where the vines couldn't lie. As they drove away from the vineyard, Ava looked back. Mom, she said. The vine was moving. Rachel glanced in the rearview mirror. The field shimmered. In the afternoon light, memorial vines swayed in the breeze, alone among a sea of green. Just the wind, baby, Rachel said softly, but in her heart, she wasn't so sure. Later that year, during an early harvest season, a new owner of Cyprus, Run Estate, would report something strange. A patch of vines near the eastern row refused to bear fruit despite good soil, perfect sun, and attentive care. They called in specialists. No one could explain it, but beneath that cursed stretch of earth, the roots had grown thick, twisting around something deeper than limestone, something that whispered, because some stories, no matter how carefully buried, never stop growing.